Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and RIBA members. Welcome to another Let's Build, Let's Talk event. This is the new TED Talks of the future. We started with 4 live events in 2019 before lockdown, and we're now in our 3rd year of Let's Build, a leading forum for women and underrepresented groups to be seen and heard in construction. Thank you for joining us at this, our 6th online event. Carrying on with the popular theme from our last event, the importance of women designing and building, taking back the power, we continue to explore how women, supporting women in construction, can bring about sustained and lasting change in our industry. The thought of female-led supply chains in construction and procurement of iconic buildings by underrepresented groups is not only pioneering, but necessary for full representation of our industry. Our keynote speaker, Sumita Singha OBE, is on the Queen's Birthday Honours List, and she's the director of Ecologic Architects. She's of Indian origin, and she has this to say: power and position are 2 different things. One doesn't lead to the other. We can all take back power if we realize we have the power within to change things, no matter what our position is in society. Removing barriers that impact women removes barriers for all. Breaking barriers. We've assembled another distinguished all-women panel this evening with speakers from the UK construction who are familiar with the barriers faced and yet have broken through and made their own mark, and I'll be introducing them to you shortly. It's time to accelerate the integration of women and underrepresented within the UK construction industry. How do we do this now so that it doesn't take another 30 years? And this is going to be debated by our panel this evening in Taking Back the Power. My name is Annette Fisher. I'm the founder and chair of Let's Build, an architect and designer, partner of FA Global, co-chair of Union, a consortium of female-led architects practices, former RIBA vice president and trustee of the Commonwealth Association of Architects, and I'm your moderator for this evening. The theme for our event, the importance of women designing and building, taking back power. At this event, we'll be looking at the empowerment of women in construction and what we can do to take ownership of our future in shaping the built environment. We invite you to join our audience to discuss these issues and to debate them with our panelists. And now, during the Q&A session, we will invite you to write your questions in the chat. I'll introduce our panelists now. Marsha Ramroop. Marsha has just started as the Director of Inclusion at the Royal Institute of British Architects this February. Previously, she ran her own strategic inclusion consultancy called Unheard Voice and worked on inclusive journalism for 25 years. She roots her approach to inclusion in cultural intelligence, CQ, which she describes as how to get sustained and sustainable outcomes in diversity and inclusion. Just one moment, please. I just need to Right. Virginia Newman is a director at KSR Architects, which specializes in high quality, high-end residential developments, from bespoke houses to large apartment complexes. Much of her work involves working with listed buildings or sensitive conservation areas. Virginia is passionate about improving diversity within architecture and the wider construction industry, having been a founding member of Architects for Change, the RIBA's Equality and Diversity Forum. She's also chaired Women in Architecture. As the RIBA's ambassador for equality, diversity, and inclusion, she actively promoted good practice to ensure that architects truly represent the society we live in. Her interest in promoting lifetime careers in architecture resulted in her chairing RIBA's CPD subcommittee, where successes include initiating a returners course and aimed particularly at women who want to return to the profession after a career break. One moment. Simone de Gale qualified at the Architectural Association and is the driving force behind Simone de Gale Architects in exclusive Belgravia district of London, whose style is grounded in mathematical principles, each project an exploration of rhythm, pattern, and repetition tectonic, shaping innovative architectural forms throughout London and internationally. She's winner of Architect of the Year Women in Construction Awards and is the current RIBA Honorary Treasurer and Board Trustee and Chief Executive and named inventor of BASL Materials Technology, developed at TR6 with the Ministry of Defence, UK. Dr. Teri Okoro is founder of TOCA, an RIBA chartered practice, co-chair of Union. One moment, please. Co-chair of Union, a collaborative startup and board member of the ARB. Recognized as a RIBA Fellow and BAME Award winner, she's a design council expert and on the expert advisory group of Historic England, an inclusion champion. She also sits on the Construction Industry Council Diversity and Inclusion panel and has delivered RIBA's inaugural Diversity and Inclusion CPD. And our keynote speaker is Sumita Singha OBE. She has recently been awarded the OBE for services to architecture. She's an award-winning architect, academic, and author with her own design practice, Ecologic Architects, which has worked internationally. Sumita's awards include the UIA UNESCO International Design Award, Women in Business Award at the House of Commons, and Atkins Inspire Award for Architecture. She was included in an exhibition about the 28 women who had made a difference to the life and culture of Britain. Sumita set up Architects for Change, the Equality Forum at the Royal Institute of British Architects, and is past chair of Women in Architecture. Sumita was elected to the RIBA Council and has served on many RIBA committees for over 25 years. She sits on the RIBA Professional Conduct Panel. She's a non-executive director of Moorfields Eye Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, where she chairs the People and Culture Committee, and sits on the Capital Investments, Scrutiny and Quality and Safety Committees. Sumita is a trustee of Architects Benevolent Society and the Commonwealth Association of Architects. She's a fellow of the Cambridge Commonwealth Trust. She's also taught architecture in the UK and abroad. She's currently a tutor in professional practice at the University of Westminster, founding director of Jerusalem International Design Charity for Community Projects, author of Architecture for Rapid Change and Scarce Resources, and autotelic architect, the 4-volume major works Women in Architecture and Future Healthcare Design. Sumita is currently writing on healthcare for another RIBA publication, and she speaks regularly on radio and podcasts about architecture. She likes to paint, cook, and garden. And Sumita will be talking about taking back the power. I give you Sumita Singha. Sumita, are you ready?
Yes, thank you so much, Annette, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to Let's Build for inviting me to talk today. When I came to the UK to study my master's in sustainable design on a scholarship as a recently qualified architect from India, I expected the 4th largest economy in the world, a liberal Western democracy, to be welcoming and open. Despite being the first woman to do this course at Cambridge, excuse my throat, when I started looking for work in the UK, I found closed doors. So over the years, I've found different ways to open those doors, sometimes a knock, sometimes a call, and sometimes even a hard thump. Wherever there was resistance, I learned to take the scenic route. Whenever I was blocked, I found other ways, my ways. These experiences made me want to create change for myself and others as I went along. One of these was the creation of Architects for Change, the Equality Forum at the RIBA, which Annette has mentioned. 21 years ago, on this very day, I wrote to many people asking them if they'd like to be part of a new umbrella organization campaigning for equality in architecture. It didn't have a name then. I called it the Equality Forum. Many months later, it would become known as Architects for Change. Like many good things that come out of bad situations, Architects for Change arose out of a crisis at the RIBA. Due to various organizational changes taking place, Women in Architecture group that I was chairing then was due to be dismantled. I was quite distraught, but after talking with my then vice chair, we got a brilliant idea. It was to be bigger and more ambitious than just the Women in Architecture group. We thought, why not ask the RIBA to create an umbrella forum for many different groups that represented those that face discrimination, such as minority ethnic architects, students, women architects, and others that were often ignored by the so-called mainstream architecture circle. That idea in 1999 seemed quite revolutionary, especially in the profession of architecture. From June 1999 onwards, I corresponded with many people at the RIBA to convince them, which itself was then undergoing a huge amount of change. So it wasn't an easy process. Money was involved. This proposal was finally accepted at the council meeting in January 2000, and then I began the hunt for people to sit on it. It wasn't an age of emails. I had to write letters. I wanted to bring all these different groups that face discrimination together under one forum, but keep them separate from the RIBA itself in order to preserve their independence and be able to challenge the institute. This idea seemed to put off a lot of people. The first batch of people who joined Architects for Change in June 2000, including many I didn't know before, I have come to know them so well as we have traveled the path of equality together. I'm very pleased that Virginia Newman, who's one of the speakers today, is here today from that batch of people that joined us in that fight. Femi Oresanya, who now chairs Architects for Change, is here too. Things have moved on at the RIBA. We also have a Director of Inclusion, Marsha Ramroop, just introduced to you, who's also on this panel. All this was unthinkable all those years ago. I had declared that the goal of this forum was to eventually become redundant, because surely equality in architecture would become commonplace. Surely everything would be equitable. I was very confident that things would be so different after 20 years. So after 21 years, have things changed for the optimistically named Architects for Change? Last week, an architect and a fellow trustee of a charity wrote on an online group chat, I would urge the charity not to be distracted by matters of diversity and inclusion. It should not spend time being distracted by other issues like climate change. The remit is clear. This was clearly aimed at me and my interests. Oh dear, it seems I've never been out of such trouble. But troublemaking can become a full-time job for those facing discrimination and for those daring to face up to it. A couple of years before Architects for Change was formed, I was called a troublemaker by my superior when I questioned her decision to stop me from attending a workplace seminar because, as she put it, I would be off on maternity leave soon. I think being a troublemaker should be on the CV of every activist and leader. As Banksy says, we should all eat our lunch and become troublemakers. The need to become troublemakers for the sake of society and for change within our profession has never been more important, for it is that troublemakers do change society and probably a profession which is resistant to change. But why do we need troublemakers in a creative profession like architecture? Isn't this a very liberal profession? The problem is that some people want to live like as if they were in the romantic past, where architecture was a gentleman's profession and a club, a private club. On the other hand, people from diverse backgrounds are seen as dangerous provocation to the pure white male world of architecture. I think behind these questions and barriers put up by people in power is often the fear of loss of their power and status. People are often afraid of the loss that change can bring, whether it is their status or support or something they have relied upon. As someone has said, it is the lack of other things that makes them cling on to power. So, what are the things in architecture that we should be making trouble about? As we have an all-female panel today, and thank you very much, Annette, for that, I'd like to look at the status of women architects and students. When I was chair of Women in Architecture in 1999, there were just about 8% women architects. Now there are 28% women architects. So that's roughly an increase of 1% each year. At this rate, if we are lucky, it will take another 22 years to get to 50-50. It's this idea of having 50-50 representation was something we had one of the previous chairs of Women in Architecture, Angela Brady, had a campaign for. So why is this happening now? One of the main reasons is the attrition of female students and those from ethnic minority backgrounds, while in the process of becoming registered as architects. So mostly women students start from 50-50 or even 50-40 at part 1, but only 38% women make it to part 3. And then at part 3, there is further attrition. It has been suggested by someone that the attrition of UK's female architecture students during their studies can be attributed to poor education and a lack of ambition. But I disagree with both of those. In fact, women generally do better than men. Digging deeper into this, we find women have been stopped from progressing all the way from being a student to running a practice. Look at the boards of large practices. Where are the women, and especially women of color? If you are a woman of color, expect to face double discrimination. If you're a woman of color, and disabled, expect triple discrimination. Sadly, women who dare to ask for more are given less. But women are paraded when diversity is demanded. Recently, one of my female students of color was considered for a competition entry on which she had never worked, only because the entry rules asked for diversity within the practice. Like this, we find people in power breaking rules, bending rules. That is why change is so difficult. Change is about taking in discomfort. Change is about breaking from the past. In 2017, women marched in unison at the Women's March in a global protest of 5 million people on January 21st, 2017. Although the march was mobilized in protest against the US President Donald Trump, who was sworn in the day before, it came to represent wider interests than just women's issues, such as immigration, healthcare, reproductive rights, the environment, gender rights, racism, freedom of religion, and workers' rights. When women march, people are afraid because women appear to bring many people together. And this makes people fearful of women's power. They're afraid because being a woman embraces many modalities. This all-woman panel today is a rare event in architecture, and I'm often part of many such panels now where I'm the only woman and the only woman of color. Perhaps it is time for all good people to show some anger in solidarity with women in architecture. Someone has said that anger can be a useful tool for change. Anger has two sides like a coin. It can be destructive or even self-destructive. However, it can be positive as well. A sense of justice derives from anger. The philosopher Amir Srinivasan reminds us, anger can be a motivating force for organization and resistance, and the fear of collective wrath can also motivate those in power to change their ways. The recent collective movements for social and environmental change has given people an agency. This is one part of self-destructive anger. And this has been obvious for Black and feminist thinkers. Audre Lorde describes women's anger as a liberating and strengthening act of clarification. It's when we feel nothing that we are actually in real trouble. Progress often comes in small steps, that every positive achievement is worthwhile, even if it can seem futile in the current landscape. And the good fight is never finished. Think on, and this is good advice for even myself, who has been a lifelong troublemaker. 3 things. How can you make effective change? How are you best heard? What kind of support do you need to make that change? Pick your fights. Work on ways to reduce the barriers to change. You may lose some battles, but you need to win the war. Get together with allies, male or female. I'm pleased today to be announcing a course about women in architecture, the very first of its kind in the world. This course is also linked with Sustainable Development Goals of encouraging diversity, removing inequality, encouraging women's empowerment, and women's role in sustainable development. So in a small way, I brought together my struggles as a young woman architect and my interest in sustainable development in this new course. I wish this kind of course was there for me 30 years ago when I began my career, and I would have understood the rules of engagement in architecture. But equally, I'm pleased that this is happening to empower and prepare younger women for what lies ahead, so that they won't make the mistakes I did. Perhaps they won't even need to be troublemakers. I hope these young women will be powerful people, powerful architects, because we need women in power. Power and position are 2 different things. One doesn't lead to the other. We can all take back power if we realize we have the power within to change things, no matter what our position is in society or the profession. So please use this occasion, use this chance to take back your power, even if it is something small you do each day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sumita. So we'll now open this discussion to the panel. One moment, please. Seems like our guests are having problems logging in. So we can now start the set. We've got some set questions. The first set question, well, first of all, thank you very much, Sumita. Taking back the power, I do see, you know, that's such an important thing, and to think that you have a course that you're about to launch specifically for women, I think that's a really, really important thing to do, because what we have to do is give women the confidence to be able to forge forward, regardless of what barriers they face. And I think that is something special we need to teach. So thank you so much for this. The first set question is, what stops us? This leads perfectly into this question, actually. What stops us / architecture at being better at supporting women? And Marsha Ramroop is going to respond to that initially. And please, other panelists, please jump in as you feel.
It's really, really great to hear Sumita speaking, and you know, I want to take this opportunity to publicly congratulate you on overcoming all the barriers that you have done to achieve what you have achieved, and to get your OBE, because it's an inspiration to us all to see what it looks like when you take back that power. And taking the scenic route isn't ideal, really. There are ways in which we need to consecutively, if you like, tackle the discrimination that happens in the first place in an upfront, tackling those systems that are creating that in that way. And when I ask the question, what's stopping us from doing better? What are the roots of that discrimination, whether it be gender, race, together, all of the underrepresented groups? When we peel back the layer of this question, the answer that I've discovered is bias. It's the bias of us all, but especially those in power. And you speak about this, Sumita, about how that power piece is one that we need to kind of get some of that space. We have 11 million pieces of information going into our brain at any given moment, but only the conscious capacity to process 40. So the shortcutting of information is a human biological need, and it's the root of bias creation. And it's those in power who create the norms that create bias. And in the UK, the population of white, heteronormative, without disability men based in London and the Southeast is just 3.1% of our population. And yet that population is the one that have power in our society. But how do we tackle this bias? How do they tackle this bias? Because they have to take responsibility for tackling it so that we can move forward. But report after report and research after research shows that the repeated suggestion that they can, simply by being aware, mitigate their own bias is not correct. So we have to stop saying that and teaching it and believing it. We have to put less store by training and more by overall structures and processes that we need to create, implement, and enforce to mitigate it. We have to put more effort into creating a culture of feedback where we can call out their bias, we can call out their mistakes, because that diversity of people around them, women, those who are of underrepresented racialized groups, people who have disabilities, different sexualities and genders, we need to be able to tell them so that they can see it and feel it clearly, and for that recipient of that feedback not to be defensive about it, because this is where we've got to, a huge amount of defensiveness when we open up these conversations. And what can I suggest that these groups of white, heteronormative, without disability men can do about the defensiveness? They've got to lean into it. Because if you approach a conversation and you're feeling uncomfortable and you don't lean into it, you're going to walk away the same way as you came in. And so we need them to go through that to get that growth and that learning. And they have to not vilify those who are raising these issues as well. So in Linda Scott's Double X Economy, there's some significant insights about how we've managed to get to this point. She says that everywhere the barriers to women's economic inclusion reach beyond work and salary to encompass property ownership, capital, credit, and markets. These economic impediments, combined with the cultural constraints usually imposed on women, limited mobility, reproductive vulnerability, and the ever-present threat of violence, form the shadow economy unique to females, which she calls the Double X Economy. If the global community chose to dissolve the economic obstacles facing women, an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity would follow. Wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be amazing? Bias of especially those in power is our biggest enemy when it comes to sustained and sustainable change. So how we must move forward must always be cognizant of this. Even when they think they're doing well and we think we're doing well, we can't rest on our laurels because our very being, biological being, is encouraging us to make assumptions. And we, even as women, just because we believe in this work doesn't mean we don't also make assumptions about each other. So it's really important that we surround ourselves with that diversity of lived experience and listen and act on those voices that are very different from our own. And this second book, Invisible Women, Exposing Data Bias in a World Designed for Men by Caroline Criado Perez, is also incredibly insightful on this area. And she says that studies have shown that a belief in your own personal objectivity or a belief that you're not sexist makes you less objective and more likely to behave in a sexist way. Women were not found to exhibit this bias, who believe that they are objective in hiring decisions are more likely to hire a male applicant than an identically described female applicant. So how do we manage this? We have to break a cycle where our bias supports systems which perpetuate in society, which reinforce our bias, and very little is changing. So in terms of the thinking around how to challenge this, this is where my paradigm underpinned with cultural intelligence comes in. So cultural intelligence, CQ, Q stands for quotient because it's a measure as well as a skill. It's the capability to work and relate effectively with people who are different from you. And when applied properly, it forces us to consciously and deliberately challenge ourselves, the perspectives we're taking, and the systems that we're succumbing to. This is the behavioral change piece that we need to break the cycle. So CQ, cultural intelligence, is comprised of 4 capabilities. The first is CQ drive. Are you motivated? Do you want to make the change to work and relate effectively with those who are different from you? Do you want to make sure that there's a 50-50 split of women in architecture? So that's the first thing. The second is CQ knowledge. What do you know? What do you need to know? Not only about yourself, but about those values that are so different from your own that they might seem alien. But it's not that they're alien. It's just that you have a set of values and you think that that's acceptable and familiar. But what's acceptable and familiar to me may not be acceptable and familiar to you. That doesn't mean that either of us are right or wrong. It's just a different perspective. So CQ knowledge is about understanding different perspectives. Then you need CQ strategy, because if you're motivated and you have some knowledge and you go straight into action without stopping to check your assumptions, without stopping to plan, without stopping to be self-aware, you're likely to act in a stereotypical and tokenistic way, which is where some of our procedures have gone wrong in the past. And then ultimately you need CQ action. People judge us on our behaviors and we need to be adaptable or not adaptable given any situation. Now, this is a proven framework, a methodology to bring about behavior change. When you know why you want to be better at inclusive action and you know what you want those outcomes to look like, you need the how to move you from one to the other. And that's what CQ does. Drive, knowledge, strategy, action gets you there. And that's how we can tackle our bias in this area.
Thank you so much, Marsha. Does anybody else want to contribute to that? I mean, it's what I think is amazing about the concept of CQ is that it makes the issues of barriers measurable and accountable. Any other comments with regard to that question, how we can be better at supporting women in architecture?
A stunned silence. My goodness, surely there's something someone can have to say about it. I mean, the thing is, it's not easy. And I don't think anyone should ever expect it to be either. But, you know, with role models like Sumita, we can aspire to push through what are very difficult conversations. But we need white allyship, we need white coalition and male coalition and collaboration, because if it were up to women to win the vote, they would have done it long before 100 years ago. You know, we need those in power to do what needs to be done so that we can bring about these changes.
I think what's really important, oh, go on, Virginia, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I remember when I was starting out, I felt that I had the least support was from the other senior women, or the senior women, as I was a junior person. And the Queen Bee complex, I think it's referred to, isn't it, was absolutely rife. And you know, I think that's something that we have turned around, and you know, are conscious that it's actually the senior people who need to be leading the way and supporting the junior people. Certainly, I found that.
I think that's an absolutely, I think that's a really valid point. I mean, I think I remember in my early years, for that reason, I preferred working for men rather than women, because you wouldn't really get that support. But we've still got lots of questions here, so I'm going to move on to the next one, and we can still come back into that. The next one is, how can we include all women when making change? And Terry's going to speak to that.
Yes, thank you, Annette. Yes, so it's important that all women are included when we make change, and good intentions alone do not achieve successful outcomes. It's enormously important that we, when we have those discussions relating to barriers facing women and how we implement change to overcome the disadvantages, that we do not discuss in silos, you know, reviewing separate characteristics in isolation. I mean, all proactive change needs to recognize intersectionality. And many people are probably already familiar with the term, but it is a framework which was coined in the late 1980s in the US for understanding how different characteristics and individual circumstances, as gender, class, race, can overlap and create a heightened but also differentiated experience of disadvantage. So we need to use this intersection lens when we're making change, and adopt a more holistic approach to considering the barriers. Women cannot just be used as a catch-all phrase, and we need to consider appropriate solutions for different groups, for the diversity of women that exist. So for instance, you know, we may come across people who may have lacked confidence due to absence of role models and not being in a context where there are women who can sort of lead the way for them. In those instances, I mean, raising the visibility of others who have achieved, who are similar to them, can help them visualize themselves as succeeding before other elements come in to assist them, whether they're in education or within the workplace. Whereas those who already have confidence, maybe they just need assistance to open that door so they can get their first roles and shine and thrive in those positions. Likewise, if you're an older woman within the profession, probably trying to crack that glass ceiling, the issues facing you are quite different from a younger person, maybe thinking of taking time off to have a child. The issues which they face will be quite different. So when we are looking at solutions to address the disadvantage of women, we need to think of the diversity of women. You know, the Black woman who may be from an LGBTI community will be different from other Black women. We know that the gender pay gap is experienced differently by Black women considered to white women. Maybe the Black woman who tries to raise an issue and make a point, I mean, Sumita said the troublemaker, but for some Black women, there's that angry Black woman stereotype, which is perceived compared to if a man made the same point. So it's quite important whether we're addressing the early career choice, entry routes into the profession, the attrition rate once people start to study, getting that first job, or even progressing your career once you're in there. Any well-meaning solution requires a nuanced approach, which considers the range of different women and what will work for them. And we need leadership actually to start to spearhead that change and to listen to the diversity of voices and lived experiences, and not just take a single perspective that we feel represents all women. So I'll stop there and invite, further comments on how we can make change for women that actually works for the diversity of women.
Thank you very much, Teri. That's excellent, talking about the diversity of women and making sure we acknowledge that difference in how we deal with it. Are there any comments from anyone from our panel, our esteemed panel? Marsha.
I think certainly when we're thinking about intersectionality, we definitely need to have an overarching approach to how we do things, because there are, to hark back to what I was saying earlier, those fundamental biases come and impact on us all. We all have bias, and I think whether we're talking about the way we treat other women, to speak to Virginia's point, or other underrepresented groups, it's definitely something that we need to look at. But there are two pieces of this puzzle in that respect. We have to lead inclusion, which is our behaviors in the way that we do things, and we have to manage diversity, which is of sort of looking at different underrepresented characteristics to make sure we're amplifying their voices and ensuring that we can listen to those different lived experiences so that we can be effective at the inclusion work. And so when you bring those together, then you're able to create equitable outcomes. So it's a multifaceted thing, but intersectionality is about our behaviors, as far as I'm concerned, the way that we approach how we work and relate effectively with those who are different from us. And that's why I believe the CQ approach is really useful.
Sumita, did you want to add anything on that?
Mute. No, I mean, it's really inspirational to hear everybody talking, and particularly, Virginia, I've known her for so long, and I know she's so inspirational. She's been at it. I think, well, when I call myself a troublemaker, I think equally I'd call Virginia sort of the most patient person I've ever seen. I don't know how she carries on. She just doesn't give up. And I think in some ways, that sort of quality of not giving up is essential to getting somewhere within women in architecture. As I said, the statistics are still quite bad for, women out there. So it means that we still have a, long march ahead. And, and I had the same experience of Virginia. In fact, I mentioned it during my speech, of a woman actually stopping me from going to a seminar because I was pregnant. And, this sort of thing, this queen bee approach, and there's an American thing as well. I don't know, something about the crab in a lobster pot or something like that. But the crab always tries to get up on the top of this pot. So this is the whole thing, and I can't remember. I think it was Annette who said that, or maybe it was Marsha who said about looking out for allies, wherever they are, because you need that support. Otherwise, it's difficult for you to manage it alone. We need that allyship to support us.
Thank you, Sumita. Having allies as well, this is so important. I think this leads us very nicely on to the next question. What are the fundamental issues that need addressing? Virginia, our patient lady.
Waited patiently for that. I am really proud to be a fellow troublemaker with Sumita, and I have to say I always feel so inadequate in her presence. She's just so amazing. But anyway, I have to say that when I started out, I really had no idea that there were issues, that there were issues, let alone what needed to be addressed. I didn't feel that I was in any way inadequate or dealt with differently. Say there were these irritating women who weren't very supportive, but I just got on with it. Anyway, I just want to respond to this by going back to the early days of Architects for Change, when women accounted for about 50% of students. It was just under 50%, but I think it was 10% of qualified architects. So we realised we had this retention problem. With Architects for Change and Women in Architecture, we got the RIBA to co-fund some research, which was done in 2002, so it's 20 years old. Why do women leave architecture? And I think it's just worth going back every so often to review what the outcomes of this are, because I'm going to read through what the fundamental issues were that came out then, and just consider whether they're still applicable today. So there were poor pay, unequal pay, sexism in the broader sense, inflexible employment conditions, workplace discrimination, poor site conditions, or the conditions on site, long hours, lack of role models, lack of encouragement to return after a career break, paternalism, sidelining, stressful working conditions, macho culture. And I think we should add in that also the cost of education and the fact that that women, that girls are very often excluded from the financial investment in their education anyway. So it has obviously made a difference. We're now up to about 30%. But what we did with this information, and I'm a great believer in getting the facts, working, finding out what they were, and then picking away at them. Worked with the RIBA and set up an action plan for dealing with each of these points. There were things like the lack of visibility of women, and we created, led by Angela Brady, an exhibition called Diverse City, which travelled around the world and actually celebrated and showcased the work of women architects and minority-led practices. In terms of poor employment practices, the RIBA put together all sorts of employment practice policies, which were enforced through chartered practice and so on. To encourage the return after a career break, there was a returners course set up, and I think we should certainly be looking at refreshing this particular course. Because and there was advice given on how to take a career break. There's ways that you can do it which make it easier to return afterwards. There was the introduction of mentoring and the need for mentors at certain crisis points in your career. It's shouldn't be underestimated, and fluid mentoring is still going on today, and I do recommend that people get involved. The long hours and poor pay, well, it still needs to be challenged. I think we're still there, aren't we? Sexism in such things as like, adverts and so on. Sumita was great at this. She was always writing to anybody when they were, advertising a boiler by having a woman's cleavage, because they seem to think that this would encourage women to specify their particular boilers. Paternalism, I think it is something that we need to call out every time, and certainly I remember looking at my previous practice and saying that, and I realized that all the outside bits of the building, the architecture of the building was being led by men, and the women were leading on all the interiors of the building. And it was something that as soon as I called them out on it, it was like shock horror. And I think they were genuinely trying to protect the women, to make sure they weren't involved in those dangerous outsidey bits. But it was addressed immediately. And I was said that the route of greatness is not through designing bathrooms and toilets and so on. I think the impact of socioeconomic factors is something we should address at some point, and also the age differences. And I think Teri, your comment about the lifetime careers, which was another thing that came out of the RIBA, is so important, that the issues facing a 25-year-old woman are not the same as those facing a 65-year-old woman or man or anybody. You know, there is a richness which should be celebrated, but say, going back to what the fundamental issues are that need addressing, the ones that came out of why do women leave architecture are still there. And can I just conclude by saying that of all the women that were interviewed, there wasn't one single issue that came out as being on top. There was a very complicated picture. Most of them had a number of issues that sort of piled up, and then there was a sort of last straw moment. But all of them left architecture regretfully, and that was a big driver for me. I thought, you know, that's incredibly sad.
Thank you so much, Virginia. I mean, I think it's a really key point, that whole family aspect of, if you like, forcing women out, that till today is still an issue. I mean, Teri, do you have some comments to add on that? Can't hear you, Teri. You're on mute.
Yeah, so I think, like Virginia said, it's never one issue. Different women will experience different, you know, ranges of issues, and then it comes to the last straw, as it were. So in putting forward, you know, proposals to assist women, the whole range needs to be there, because different women will require different policies. So being inclusive is not being restricted, it's being able to cater for the wide range of requirements which may exist. And so you may look within your organization and say, you know, where are we getting the barriers? Where are women not progressing? Where are they living? What do we need to do to keep them, or to encourage more women maybe coming into the senior positions and things like that. So we're hoping that with a different working context, where it has been proven that we can work a bit more flexibly and not all be in the office from 9 to 9, that practices, when they reopen, will offer sort of more flexible working provisions, because that will assist a wide range of women who have problems within architecture.
Thank you very much, Teri. This leads us now on to the next question, is how do you take ownership of your own space? Simone de Gale. Simone?
Thank you, Annette. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, good. Thank you to all the wonderful ladies who have been speaking this evening so far. It's very, very interesting to hear the views and the experiences. And I wanted to take a bit of a different perspective on this, you know, taking back our power, and how do you take ownership of your own space? Because I've always felt like I've owned my own space. I've always felt confident, and, you know, that I could achieve whatever I wanted to do. My granddad, he was an architect in the Caribbean, and my father and my uncles all work in construction in London. So I was brought up on building sites, and I always felt very confident. You know, I was always around these strong men, and I was always encouraged to be confident and to just, you know, be the best at whatever I wanted to achieve. And naturally, I decided to become an architect, you know, to sort of follow in the family footsteps. And going through my education and then getting, you know, my first experiences on projects, I never really had much of an issue. And I always felt, you know, that if you presented the best skill, and if you were, you know, provided the best work for that job, I would get that job. And it's followed through. And I've set up my business as soon as I finished university. And it's been, you know, really, really really good for me, and it's encouraging me just to feel more confident. I've got some good projects and some very good clientele. And so I've always felt very comfortable to own my own space and to sort of craft my life however I wanted to craft it. And so I wanted just to see how we can find ways, you know, to encourage women to take ownership of their own space, as opposed to asking for space to be made for them. And I'm really interested to know also, or to highlight as well, that with that, you know, with that ownership of space also comes responsibility. And, you know, sometimes I think it's the responsibility which can actually be quite a different perspective, or not perspective, quite a shock maybe, once that ownership of that space is retained. And I think that, you know, we just have to keep encouraging each other to take up that ownership of their space. And what I'm in particular interested in is, as I run my own business, you know, we're family planning, I'm getting to the age when I want to think about having a child. And what I'm understand, you know, from recent surveys, I think the latest in 2016, is that when women in architecture are looking to have children, about 90% are quite concerned about, you know, returning back to work after. And so I really want to try to address this issue, because as I run my own business, I'm pretty much free to do whatever I want, you know, when I'm ready to have my child. But for women who don't want to run their own business and maybe want to work in companies, I'm more interested in to see how those environments can be catered for women. So, and can be catered to acknowledge that women do have children. And women don't only have girl children, they have male children as well. So, you know, it's a really fundamental to acknowledge that, you know, we actually are human beings and we reproduce, and this is part of our life cycle. And to embrace that, as opposed for it to be something which is put into a different category, you know, it's a career lady. Why can't a career lady also have a family? And then why does the family have to be of the structure that once a lady has a child, they will take leave, maybe the father will take 2 weeks paternity leave, but then the female may be off for 6 months or longer, or might not, as I mentioned in that survey, might not return to the job at all. We really have to start to incorporate the facts of life into our workspaces as well as our homes. And I've done some research on this as well, and it's something that we've done in some of our design work, because we do commercial office practice. And there's companies, I will mention, you know, the highest brands. They're Goldman Sachs, Cisco, Facebook, and Google. They're all addressing this issue now. So when they have their offices, as well as having those office spaces, they're also starting to incorporate amenities for parents in those commercial workplaces. They're starting to introduce subsidized creches and nurseries, so that when a couple do have a child, maybe they can sort of share the load of looking after that child and raising that child, and it can be incorporated into their workplace. There's even spaces like lactation rooms, which are being incorporated into these offices. And this is the sort of ideology that we need to have as architects, as designers. If we are women and we're going to be designing spaces, we need to design spaces for all of society, not only a part of society. You know, just to sort of go on about inclusive design in general, there's also, you know, things like multi-faith rooms and breakout zones, and then maybe co-working spaces for people who are more extroverted, and then maybe more sort of smaller one-to-one spaces for people who are more introverted in their characteristic. So it's really about us women taking ownership of our space and designing that space so that it can be a space that can incorporate all of society. And that's what I really want to, that's what I really feel passionate about. And that's what I really want to push in as this topic tonight, because we are architects, we are designers. And so we actually have the power to design these spaces and to, you know, encourage our clients to take up these spaces, because this is what this will be for the best interest of that particular work environment. It will be able, they'll be able to retain their good quality staff, you know, the sort of longevity of employment, instead of looking for another office where where a woman might have more flexible time. They will feel comfortable to have flexible time in the office, which maybe they've given many years to. So this is what I really want to encourage this evening. You know, how can we be practical and how can we make concrete changes in our industry, where we can design these spaces and you know, build them so that we can start to build inclusive workspaces and make people, women and men, feel much more comfortable in the facts of life and, you know, to spread that equality further.
Thank you so much, Simone. I mean, I think that's such a valid point. It's a natural part of life. Why aren't we accommodating this in our day-to-day? We've got to move on, so I'm not going to invite, I'm just going to go to the next question before we now open it up to our audience. The final question is, women are pushed to the back, especially in architecture. If we start challenging this, we get called troublemakers. Is it possible to create change by bringing everyone with us? Sumita. Sumita?
Yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. So yes, so I've spoken a lot about being a troublemaker, and I think it was someone who said, you know, women must make trouble on behalf of others. And actually, when you make that sort of trouble, you do get into trouble yourself. You know, nobody wants to know you. You know, you're alone. So the question about bringing others with you is very valid, because if you don't bring others with you, then you're not going to have change. So, I mean, I know, you know, there are practical things you can do about designing inclusive places. But we have to remember that architects' practices, 80% of those are small practices that you're talking about. So doing the sort of stuff that Apple and Google and other people are doing is not possible for a small practice. But what are the sort of other practical stuff that architects can do? And I mean, one of the things I talked about earlier was having allies. And I think one of you also spoke about it. So get together with allies, see who's supporting you, talk to people. That's really important. And, you know, sometimes having this dialogue, telling someone that this is not right, that, you know, you don't want to be treated like that. I know there was a young woman, an Indian young woman who was pregnant, and she was being made to walk 4 floors up and down during her day. And she found it really uncomfortable as she got more and more, she got bigger. And she came to me, I think I was still chair of Women in, of the Architects for Change. And I encouraged her to actually speak to her boss rather than, you know, doing something which would make her lose her job. So she did. And in fact, she was then moved to the ground floor where she stayed for the rest of her pregnancy. And so those small little acts of empowerment, actually, like talking, dialogue is an act of empowerment. And, you know, when I talk about troublemaking, I am just trying to be funny, I think, but troublemaking is about having this dialogue with people. And so if you can do that, that's really helpful. And, you know, the other thing is obviously to bring about a wider change in the profession. So within the change that, you know, we see that architects, nobody is too bothered about architects anyway. You know, people don't know what architects do. There was a survey done in 2012 where 15% of the people said they don't know what architects do. So if you consider that, and then you consider a woman architect, they don't know, you know, what do you do? Why do you have to be an architect? So it is on the RIBA to actually explain to the public that, you know, we are actually placemakers. We are creating a more equitable society and environment for other people. So let's empower these women architects. Let's teach them. And, you know, this course that I'm going to start teaching, it's in Milan. So why is it not happening in the UK? Well, we actually need more. There are more female architects in Italy than there are in the UK. So why is it that the Italians have got their act together and thinking, oh, we need to do this course, even though they are in a better position than us? So, you know, the institute, the Italian Institute of Architects has said, okay, we want to do this course. And not only just that, they're going to connect it with the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, this kind of far-reaching idea is come from their institute. So I want to see the RIBA actually doing something, and that's direct challenge to you, Marsha, as well. I know. So, you know, let's do this on the three aspects. You know, first is on the one-to-one basis, and second on a professional basis, and thirdly for the wider society and for the institute to actually help us move along, because it benefits everybody in the end.
It does indeed. Thank you so much, Sumita. I'd like to now open it to the floor, please. Are there any questions from the floor?
May I just quickly, just briefly respond to Sumita there,
Sure,
just to
go ahead.
say, whatever you say, Sumita, whatever you say. Listening, I'm listening.
Any questions from the floor? Well, I'll if you can put a question in the chat if you've got one. We've got one at the moment, which is, what do you recommend for early career graduates who don't have connections in the industry? Who'd like to take that one?
I'll take it.
I
would say that, you know, I would say that, you know, when I started university, the first thing I did was start to network. So, you know, by the time I finished my, you know, my studies, I had a big network. And so I would just say, you know, there's lots of events and lots of communities, you know, lots of things online, and then also groups, and hopefully very soon more activities in person. And so I would just say network as much as you can, and don't be shy. I would say, you know, just put yourself out there as much as you can, just to build up those connections, because the worst thing that someone could say is no. And, you know, after all those no's, you will get yes. So I would just say work very hard and just continue to build your network, and you will get, you know, what you want to achieve.
Thank you so much, Simone. Alistair Blythe, you have your hand up. Would you like to ask a question? Alistair?
Yes, sorry, yes, I'm here. Yes, it was really about the role of education, because thank you very much, everybody, for what has been a fantastic, I think, discussion on the subject and inspiring. And some of you will know that Sumita and indeed Annette, you teach on our professional practice program at the University of Westminster, which, you know, where we have more than 400 students in this year's cohort. So we're by far the biggest program. And so we see about a third of architects, or about 1,200, I think, that get onto the register. So per year, so we see about a third of them. And clearly, you know, education, I think, is clearly very important. And of course, we have about 50% women on our course too, glad to say. And I think, you know, it is though very sad to see that tail off in the ARB on the register, where you only have, at the moment, I think you said 28%. I think that was the figure we have. But really, you know, some of what you've been talking about, I mean, I was interested in the comment about building allies and bringing everybody. That must surely start or could start within the education context, couldn't it? I mean, in terms of actually everybody being on this same page. Would you agree? Would you agree that, I mean, education in a sense has a prime role to play here?
Well, definitely. Marsha, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just to respond to that, absolutely it does. I think, you know, when we're approaching how to be better at inclusion in architecture, you have to start with how you attract people into the profession and how you treat them. And I heard a really lovely analogy the other day that said that if the pipeline is leaking, you don't blame the water. You either create a new pipeline or at least try to fix one. And there's something fundamentally problematic happening in terms of what happens to those women. You know, you've got your 50% coming in, so there's no barrier in terms of actually, you know, that gender balance going into and attracting into the profession. So what is happening? And, you know, Virginia spoke about that research from 2003. Nothing has changed in 20 years. So presumably all of those, some of those factors are at play here. We have to think about the cost. We have to think about, you know, women thinking that they can't study or do the really low paid internships. Still haven't quite got my head around, you know, some of the different requirements of the different parts. But, you know, these are fundamental issues, and it does start there. But also I think the schools of architecture have an obligation to look at how they're going about doing their education piece, what kind of codes of conduct they have in terms of what they're delivering, the way that crit is done, you know, what kind of cultural understanding is there. So there are a number of different issues that I think that the schools of architecture can take responsibility for, and it is on my year 2 list of to-dos.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Thank you.
I mean, I think the other thing which you've probably touched on, Alistair, is I think it actually is also about having more women, having more equity in terms of the leadership, the lecturing and so on, because with that would come adjustments in attitudes. Because I'm sure that today, listening to all our panelists, there are, you know, perspectives that will sort of be, I hope, have light bulb kind of moments for you in terms of what you know, the day-to-day issues of what women have to deal with in terms of the cycle of life, and the fact that the cycle of life somehow is considered unnatural when it comes to a workspace, instead of being embraced and being part of what we should be doing. Are there any other, do you have another question? Did that answer it for you, Alistair?
Well, yes, I mean, it's a discussion we could carry on for hours on end, and no doubt I'll come back to it. I mean, it would be interesting to do some more research, wouldn't it, to find out, you know, where we are in terms of why women in today's context why we're not seeing, you know, more women come through into both in progressing from education into architecture and then staying there and then rising up to the top.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, Alistair, is about the length of the course. So by the time a woman finishes, you know, she's getting to the point where she might want to start a family. But you have the same situation in medicine. So why is it happening in architecture, this situation, and not in medicine, which is equally expensive, long course? So that's what we have to start with. And one of the things, you know, sort of teaching on the part 3 has been very interesting, because I also, I'm an external examiner for the AA along with Cheryl at, you know, for the part 3 there. And the issue I'm finding consistently is that women tend to get treated quite badly through their periods of employment. So I've got a student at the moment who's, you know, the office cleaner has been fired, and she has to do the office cleaning, including washing up cups and things. So, and this is the same student who was then put up for this diversity, you know, in the competition when they asked for diversity. So the problem with women, you know, and this is why this troublemaking is, that if she decides to protest about this, she might lose her job, and then she might not get to complete her part 3. So is this the wider issue within architecture? What are the schools of architecture going to do about it? So I ran a little survey on my Twitter account, and the 3 things I asked them: whether, you know, the institute should take action against this particular, such practices, whether, you know, there should be like Glassdoor type reviews for practice. So there's, don't go and work there because this is what they do. Or should the tutors actually complain? There should be like, you know, a way that the tutors can complain in a way that the student is protected. Because, you know, there's always this fear that they will take, you know, the student out rather than improve their practice. So out of that, the most popular suggestion was the tutors should do something. So it's actually on all these tutors here who are here today, maybe, you know, we should become troublemakers. And Alistair, you are our ally.
I'm the arts tutor, you mean?
Head of school, and then maybe, you know, you should take this on and send it to the RIBA and say, why is this happening?
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. And I'm quite kind of, one of the things, Sumita and Annette, you'll both be aware of, and the others won't yet, is that we have, and I've actually just got ethics approval to run this survey. Ironically, it's a strand of ethics anyway that we're talking about, of course, on our student Part 3 cohort, to understand better about the working conditions that they're in, both types of contract, bullying, harassment, intimidation, all of these things. And we will start running this next week with our current cohort, which you know, I hope will give us some understanding, because, you know, we do want to find what the some of the empirical evidence is in terms of numbers, to be able to say, well, actually, this is what is happening. The other thing that occurs to me, actually, Sumita, while you're talking, sorry, very quickly, is that we have got very close to the Imperial College Medical School for another project that we're running with them at the School of Architecture. It might be interesting, wouldn't it, to follow up your thought there on doing a survey of maybe medical students, or maybe recent medical students, and maybe they can help us do this, to kind of understand better why they progress. So what you know, because you mentioned the difference between medicine and architecture students. See if we can actually unpick that, because we could. I'm sure we could actually do that.
Thank you, Alistair, that's excellent. I mean, I really think that would be a very valuable piece of work to do. I'm so sorry, but this is really exciting, but we've got to move on, because I don't want us to be on here for 2 hours, because I think it would be a bit much. So we've got to, I think we are going to, you know, record this, and we're going to have a follow-up of this on the 8th of July. But so we'll be able to continue the debate. But at this point, we've got to go on to our next item, which is to tell you about the launch of the Let's Build Academy. And Cheryl, you're going to just speak to that. If you'll just, we'll have that up on screen.
Yeah, so thank you, Annette, for handing over. So we're really excited at Let's Build to have this brand new initiative launching today. And the concept is ultimately to truly give that opportunity for those who are finding it very difficult to get their foot in the door into practice. And we want to enable soft landing for as many as we can. And for that purpose, we would need to really rely on our industry network in order to get places offered for students who we will have coming to us to support them in trying to find a placement. And we will offer them mentoring and coaching within the Let's Build industry and membership team that we have, and assist practices in matching up with the ideal intern for them. So we really do encourage anyone who's in this a conference call with a practice who may be considering an intern for their part one role that they might have available coming up in the near future. If you have that on a kind of reasonably regular basis, please let us know, and we'll be really keen to discuss it with you as to how we can start helping you find the right people for your practices.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Yeah, we'll be networking with using our connections to provide that missing link for those underrepresented students that aren't able to get through the door. And I'm pleased to say that you know, we are already speaking with Alistair about this, and you know, we're very hopeful that we can make a difference and really help those disadvantaged students. So at this point, I'm going to ask for the vote of thanks to be given by Elizabeth, who's been hosting us, by the way. She's been managing everything behind the scenes. Elizabeth, are you there?
Hi, everyone. I sincerely apologize for the video quality. I'm currently working in a Spanish practice, so I'm not in the UK right now. But I would like to thank all our panelists for such an amazing evening and for sharing their knowledge and their experiences. As a woman at the start of my career, seeing women succeeding is important, but also what's more important is seeing women succeed as themselves. You know, coming with, you know, the context of your life, with your background, with who you are and your identity, and being able to succeed as you are. That's something that is probably the most important thing for me, because I find that I've always found myself kind of battling between, you know, trying to be true to myself, but also I want to succeed, you know. So that's been, you know, it's only been a couple of years that I've been, you know, on this path professionally, but that's something that has always been in the back of my mind. So seeing such an amazing panel of women doing amazing things, it's truly inspiring, because it tells me as a young woman that the goals and dreams that I have aren't too big and they're not too ambitious, or I'm not, you know, I haven't got my head in the clouds, you know. The women on this panel have, you know, broken barriers and open doors so that people like me can walk through them. So I sincerely want to thank all of our speakers for sharing their experiences and for the work they're doing. I would also like to thank our audience for attending and for your amazing contributions this evening. I would like to thank our Let's Build committee members, Neil, Femi, Rashid, Francetta, Shay, Cheryl, Farhana, Aisha, and our founder and chair, Annette. We would also like to thank the RIBA, Places for People, and Younger TV for their continued support. We would also like to invite all of you to join us in continuing this conversation on the Clubhouse social media app. So what we've started doing is having Clubhouse socials where we can continue these kinds of conversations in a more relaxed setting where everyone can have a chance to contribute. Our Clubhouse social to continue this conversation will happen on Thursday, the 8th of July at 7 p.m. UK time, and we would love for you all to be there. On the evening, there will be the Let's Build team, of course, our amazing panelists, and we'll also be joined by Jason Boyle of the Global Architects Alliance. So it's going to be a great conversation, and we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Can I just ask all the Let's Build committee members just to turn on their cameras, just to acknowledge them before we have the final closing. So if you'd all just turn on your camera. Great, Neil, Francetta, thank you all. At this point, just as a final closing, I'm going to ask Marsha and Neil to give us our final closing before we say goodnight. Marsha.
I want to share with you, just as a final thought, some words from Kamala Harris, the truths we hold. Kamala Harris, of course, being the Vice President of the United States, in her autobiography. She says, "My daily challenge to myself is to be part of the solution, to be a joyful warrior for the battle to come. My challenge to you is to join that effort, to stand up for our ideals and our values. Let's not throw up our hands when it's time to roll up our sleeves. Not now, not tomorrow, not ever. Years from now, our children and our grandchildren will look up and lock eyes with us. They will ask us where we were when the stakes were so high. They will ask us, what was it like? I don't want us to just tell them how we felt. I want us to tell them what we did.
Thank you, Marsha. Neil, final word?
I am absolutely overwhelmed with how well this has turned out. I've never been in such a room with such absolutely amazing people and heard such brilliant speeches of inspiration from every single person in the room. And every single person had their own angle, how they came from, where they are now. And it's amazing. And if I could physically take this room up and put it in front of a BBC TV and let everybody listen and hear to how you guys are telling it the way it is from the past, the present, and the future, it would be amazing. And what I would say is that just to pick up on one thing that Elizabeth said is, I dream, and this is what we have to do. And this is what gives us the motivation in life, is if we dream. And we have to dream that always we're going to be in a better land of where we are now. And I think that if we all come together, we can form fantastic, amazing collaborations. Don't matter who you are, where you come from, but we have to do it together. And the system will only change if we come together. We can't rely on them changing it for us. We have to do it. You've been doing it for so many years, so many of you in your individual way. But if you come together, we will change, this change will happen. And Annette, thank you from the bottom of my heart for bringing Let's Build for Women together. Because when you first said it to me, I thought, what an idea. Women building from the way up. And what we have to do is all the people who are outside of the room, they've got to come into the room. And we have to get all of those directors who don't necessarily want to hear, but need to listen. And that's the most important thing. And I think once they're listening, they would see that they don't have to be afraid, because at the moment they're afraid. Come into the room, join us, join you guys, and let's make a better future for everybody and for the next generation. And that, everybody, thank you very much.
Thank you all. At this point, we bring it to a close. Good night, and thank you.